your fiancé has set you up to death!
I had exactly 30 seconds before the espresso hit the table and the hollow points hit his heart. My fingers trembled as I gripped the leather-bound menu, my thumb smearing the fresh ink on the note tucked beneath the specials. Around me, the restaurant hummed with the golden, muffled vibration of the Chicago elite. Crystal chandeliers cast soft, deceptive halos over men who moved the world and women who destroyed it. I approached the center table like I was walking toward a firing squad. Jae-hyun sat with the terrifying stillness of carved marble. His dark suit was sharp enough to cut, but it was the tattoos creeping up his neck, dark, jagged ink against a formal collar, that told the real story. He was a king in a room full of pretenders. Beside him, Vivian was a vision in black silk and light brown waves. She looked like a woman who had spent the morning dreaming of her wedding. She hadn't. 20 minutes ago, I'd stood in the shadows of the foyer and heard her whisper a price into her phone. I scanned the room, seeing the world through her eyes now. 2 by the entrance, 1 near the coat check, 1 watching the kitchen door. Crossfire. I could keep walking. I could let the coffee be served and go back to my mother's hospital bills and my own quiet, invisible life. Jae-hyun was a monster. Maybe the world was better off without him. But then I saw the way he looked at the menu, tired human, unaware of the blade at his back. I couldn't just let the light go out. I leaned in, my shadow falling across his table. I didn't reach for the water glass. Instead, I let my voice drop into a jagged thread, whispering the 7 words that would either burn my life to the ground or forge it into something new. The 7 words had barely left my lips when the atmosphere in the room shifted from velvet luxury to a vacuum. Jae-hyun didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the door. He simply closed the menu with a soft thud and looked up at me, his dark eyes searching mine for the slightest hint of a lie. He found none. Espresso for the lady, he said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that betrayed nothing to the room. And I'll have the check. Vivian's hand froze over her phone. The fake smile she had been wearing didn't slip, it curdled. Before she could speak, the front windows shattered. The sound was like a thunderclap inside a jewelry box. Shards of crystal rained down on the white tablecloths. I didn't wait for an invitation. I grabbed the sleeve of Jae-hyun's expensive suit and pulled. To my surprise, he followed, his other hand diving into his jacket. The kitchen. Move. I screamed over the sudden chorus of shattered glass and high society screams. We burst through the swinging stainless steel doors, just as a bullet sparked off the brass handle behind us. The kitchen was a chaos of steam and clattering pans. The chefs were already diving for cover, but I knew this terrain better than any of them. I knew which floorboards were slick with grease and which corners offered a blind spot. Stay low. Jae-hyun commanded, pushing me behind a prep station as a man in a nondescript suit rounded the corner by the pastry line. Jae-hyun fired twice. The grace of the dining room was gone. He was a predator now, his movements surgical and cold. But there were more coming through the loading dock. We were being squeezed. This way. I hissed, grabbing a heavy metal tray to use as a makeshift shield. I led him past the roaring rotisserie toward the back corridor where the heavy, insulated doors of the walk-in units stood like iron sentinels. I could hear the heavy boots of a hitman echoing against the tile, closing in on our flank. He was fast, cutting off our path to the alley exit. I looked at the heavy brass latch of the walk-in freezer, the coffin we called it, because the seal was airtight. Jae-hyun, the door. I pointed. He understood instantly. As the hitman lunged around the corner, weapon raised, Jae-hyun feinted left, drawing the man's fire into a stack of silver mixing bowls. In that split second of distraction, I threw my weight against the freezer door, swinging it wide. The blast of sub-zero air hit the humid kitchen like a physical blow. The hitman stumbled, his momentum carrying him toward the icy dark. Jae-hyun didn't give him a chance to recover. He delivered a brutal short-range kick to the man's chest, sending him sprawling into the rack of frozen sides. I slammed the door shut and threw the exterior locking bar home. The muffled pounding from inside the steel door was the only sound for a heartbeat. I stood there, chest heaving, my white apron stained with soot and gray dishwater. Jae-hyun turned to me, his gun still leveled at the door, his neck tattoos dark with sweat. For the first time, he didn't look at me like a waitress. He looked at me like a survivor. You know the back alleys, he rasped. Every inch, I whispered. Then lead the way, Amara. If we stay, we're ash. The transition from the freezing loading bay to the back of a blacked-out SUV had been a blur of screeching tires and muffled radio commands. Now, the silence of the safe house was louder than the gunfire. The room was a cavern of shadows and exposed concrete, smelling of old dust and expensive cologne. Jaehyun sat in a minimalist chair, the single overhead light catching the sharp angle of his jaw and the dark intricate ink that disappeared beneath his collar. I stood in the center of the room, still wearing my white apron, now stained with broth and grease, feeling like a ghost haunting a fortress. "Who are you working for, Amara?" His voice was a low, dangerous vibration. He didn't look like the man who had leaned on my shoulder in the kitchen. He looked like the monster the tabloids whispered about. He rose slowly, circling me with the predatory grace of a wolf. "Vivian is clever," he continued, his footsteps echoing. "A staged assassination, a heroic waitress who just happened to be in the right hallway at the right time. It's a classic play. She plants you by my side, and I'm so grateful for my life that I don't notice the viper in my bed has moved into my head." "I don't even know who you are," I snapped, my voice trembling but sharp. I refused to look down. "I know you're a regular at Table 1. I know you tip well and like your steak blue. That's it." He stopped directly in front of me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his suit. He reached out, his gloved hand catching my chin, forcing me to meet his gaze. His eyes were like obsidian, dark, polished, and impenetrable. "Then why? Why risk a bullet for a man you don't know?" "Because I needed the shift," I whispered, a jagged laugh catching in my throat. "Because if you died at Table 1, the restaurant would close for a week for the investigation. And if I don't work this week, the hospital stops my mother's dialysis." The grip on my chin didn't loosen, but his eyes narrowed. "You did it for a paycheck?" "I did it because I've spent my whole life being invisible, watching people like you and Vivian treat the world like a game," I said, the raw truth pouring out of me. "I heard her. I saw the way she looked at her phone while she looked at you. It was disgusting. And I knew if I let it happen, I'd be just as cold as she is. I don't want your empire, Jaehyun. I want my mother to breathe another month." Jaehyun stared at me for a long pulse-pounding minute. He was looking for the lie, the flicker of a script, the tell of a spy. But all he found was the exhausted honesty of a woman who had nothing left to lose but her soul. Slowly, he released my chin. He stepped back into the shadows, the tension in his shoulders shifting just a fraction. "The debt for Mercy Hospital," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I own the holding company that manages their private accounts." He turned back to me, his expression unreadable but no longer murderous. "Your mother stays on the machines, Amara. But you? You don't go back to the restaurant. Vivian knows your face now. You're in my world. And in my world, there is no such thing as a free meal." The blue glow of the television in the safe house was the only thing cutting through the dark, and it was broadcasting my face to the entire city. "Police are seeking this woman, Amara Brooks, in connection with the brutal shooting at the Gilded Lotus," the news anchor announced over a grainy screenshot from the restaurant's security feed. "Authorities believe she was an accomplice who facilitated the entry of the gunman before fleeing with an unidentified male suspect." Vivian was fast. She wasn't just killing Jaehyun, she was erasing the only witness who could prove her betrayal. By making me a fugitive, she'd ensured that even if I walked into a police station, I'd be silenced before I could speak. "She's turned the city into a cage," Jaehyun muttered, his phone screen dark. "My accounts are flagged, my face is on every digital billboard from the Loop to O'Hare, and my own security detail is likely being paid by my uncle to find us." "They're looking for a mafia boss and a waitress," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "They're looking in five-star hotels and private docks. They aren't looking in the places where people go to be forgotten." I reached out and grabbed his hand, his skin cold and dry. "We have to go off the grid. Truly off. No cars with GPS, no credit cards, no penthouse views. We're going to my neighborhood." Jaehyun looked at his tailored suit, then at the desolate concrete walls of the safe house. For the first time, the King of Chicago looked out of his depth. We ditched the SUV in a drainage canal and spent the next 3 hours navigating the veins of the city, the narrow alleys, the rusted fire escapes, and the bus lines that smelled of damp wool and exhaustion. I watched Jaehyun adjust. He moved through the crowded transit stations like a ghost, his predatory grace hidden beneath a moth-eaten hoodie I'd scavenged from a donation bin. By the time we reached the south side, the transition was complete. The towering glass spires of his empire were replaced by cracked asphalt and the flickering neon of liquor stores. My apartment is above a laundromat, I whispered as we stepped off the last bus. The locks are trash, but the neighbors don't talk to cops, and they definitely don't read the society pages. Jaehyun stood on the sidewalk, watching a stray dog trot past a pile of uncollected trash. The billionaire who owned half the city's skyline was suddenly a man who didn't even have a key to his own front door. He looked at the peeling paint of my building, then at me. "You live here," he said. It wasn't a question, but a realization. "It's not marble and silk, Jaehyun. But in this block, I'm the one with the power. Here, you're just another man in the shadows." I led him up the creaking stairs, the scent of detergent and fried onions thick in the air. For the first time since the espresso hit the table, the hunter was the one being protected. The small flickering television in my apartment didn't just show my face, it showed the funeral of a city's peace. While Jaehyun sat on my mismatched sofa, his large frame making the room feel like a dollhouse, the screen cut to a remote stretch of the Chicago riverfront. Vivian stood in the center of the frame, draped in a coat of pale ivory that seemed to glow against the industrial grime. She wasn't hiding. She was performing. Beside her, Uncle Sang-woo, the man Jaehyun had trusted to run his docks, nodded solemnly as she spoke to a huddle of reporters about stability and the tragic loss of a visionary. "She's not just taking the throne," Jaehyun whispered, his voice like grinding stone. "She's burning the kingdom to keep herself warm." The broadcast shifted to a shaky cell phone recording from an hour prior. My breath hitched. It showed Captain Park, Jaehyun's most loyal advisor and the man who had practically raised him after his father's death, being led out of a black sedan in handcuffs. But they weren't police handcuffs. They were zip ties. Vivian walked up to him in the video. There was no sound, just the cold, jagged motion of her lips. She leaned in, appearing to offer a kiss of peace, but as she pulled away, Park's knees buckled. He collapsed into the slush of the gutter, a thin, dark line blooming across his throat. Vivian didn't flinch. She simply wiped a speck of red from her ivory sleeve and climbed back into the car. Jaehyun surged to his feet, the force of his movement knocking a stack of my mother's medical bills off the coffee table. The raw guttural sound that escaped his throat wasn't a cry, it was a vow. Park had the codes to the offshore shipping manifests, Jaehyun said, his eyes fixed on the frozen image of his fallen mentor. He died because he wouldn't give them to her. He died for a ghost. The air in the cramped apartment turned heavy, charged with a grief so sharp it felt like a physical weight. The betrayal was no longer a boardroom coup or a dinner party assassination. It was personal. Vivian wasn't just pruning the family tree, she was uprooting everything Jaehyun had ever loved to make room for her own poisoned ivy to grow. He turned toward the window, looking out at the skyline he used to rule, his reflection in the glass fractured by a crack in the pane. "She thinks I'm dead," he murmured, his hands clenching into white-knuckled fists. "And as long as she thinks that, she'll keep killing everyone who remembers my name." I stepped beside him, my hand hovering near his arm. "Then we make sure she stops thinking." He looked at me, and for the first time, the coldness in his eyes was replaced by a burning, singular focus. The waitress and the ghost were done hiding. The cramped apartment transformed into a makeshift war room, the scent of lavender detergent replaced by the metallic tang of oil and the heavy weight of intent. Jaehyun didn't start with a gun, he started with a mirror. "Survival isn't about the weapon in your hand, Amara. It's about the eyes in your head," he murmured, standing behind me. His reflection was a dark silhouette against my shoulder. A waitress sees a customer who needs water. A predator sees the bulge of a holster under a jacket, the nervous tap of a finger against a thigh, the way a man's weight shifts toward the exit before he even knows he's afraid. He moved behind me, his hands guiding mine as he handed me a heavy, cold Beretta. The weight was jarring, a sudden anchor in my world of ghost-thin aprons. He didn't let go. His chest was a wall of heat against my back, and his breath grazed my ear as he adjusted my stance. "Close your eyes," he commanded. I obeyed. "Tell me where I am." "Behind me," I whispered, my heart rate spiking. "Too easy. Tell me how many steps to the door. Tell me which floorboard creaks. Tell me where the shadows are deep enough to hide a blade." For hours, he dismantled my invisibility and rebuilt it as a shield. He taught me the scan, the rhythmic sweep of a room that divided people into threats, distractions, and targets. Every time I faltered, his touch was there to correct me, a firm hand on my hip to steady my core, a thumb tracing the line of my jaw to lift my gaze. The professional distance we had maintained was dissolving into a suffocating, electric tension. By midnight, the air in the apartment felt thin, charged with a static that had nothing to do with the city lights outside. I was breathless, my muscles aching from a focus I hadn't known I possessed. I turned to face him, the gun safely on the table between us. The light from the street lamp filtered through the cracked window, painting bars of silver across his face, highlighting the ink on his neck. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "You could have just given me money and told me to run." Jae-hyun reached out, his fingers hovering just an inch from my cheek before he finally closed the gap. His skin was rough, a stark contrast to the velvet life he had lost. "Because the world is full of people who want to take everything from you, Amara. And I realized tonight, I'm one of the few who wants to give you the power to stop them." The look in his eyes wasn't just about strategy anymore. It was a hunger, raw and dangerous. When he leaned in, the kiss wasn't a question, it was a collision, a desperate, bruising acknowledgement that we were both drowning, and each other's only hope for air. The transition from a stained white apron to a $3,000 gown felt like donning a suit of armor forged from starlight and silk. The dress was a deep, midnight emerald, clinging to my frame in a way that commanded the space I used to vanish into. As I stepped out of the black sedan and onto the red carpet of the Chicago Opera House, I didn't look like a girl who spent her mornings counting loose change for the laundromat. I looked like a threat. "Remember," Jae-hyun's voice crackled through the microscopic earpiece, his tone a low, steady anchor in the sea of camera flashes. "You aren't there to serve. You are there to be served. Own the floor, Amara. Let them wonder who you are, but never let them know." The charity auction was a den of vipers draped in diamonds. I scanned the room, my training clicking into place with a mechanical precision. Exits at the north and south. Security detail by the champagne tower, too relaxed, watching the cleavage, not the hands. Uncle Sang-woo at the bar, nursing a scotch. Then I saw her. Vivian was at the center of a circle of sycophants, wearing a dress of blinding, innocent white. She was laughing, the sound like breaking glass, as she accepted condolences for her missing fiancé. My stomach turned, but my face remained a mask of cool, aristocratic boredom. I moved through the crowd, practicing the predator scan Jae-hyun had drilled into me. I saw the bulge of a wire beneath a waiter's vest and the telltale earpieces of Vivian's personal guard. I wasn't just a guest, I was a ghost in the machine. I waited until Vivian moved toward the silent auction tables, a glass of vintage Bollinger in her hand. I intercepted her path with the grace of a woman who had never known a day of labor in her life. "The bidding on the sapphire is quite aggressive, isn't it?" I asked, my voice smooth and devoid of the Chicago accent I'd spent a lifetime honing. Vivian paused, her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, sweeping over me. She didn't recognize the waitress she'd ordered dead. She saw a rival. "It's a beautiful stone," she replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. "But some things are worth the price of a war." As she turned to admire the gem, I leaned in, pretending to stumble over the hem of my gown. My hand brushed against the underside of the mahogany table where her beaded clutch rested. In one fluid motion, I pressed the ceramic bug, no larger than a grain of rice, into the seam of the wood. The magnetic latch clicked. "Forgive me," I murmured, righting myself with a practiced tilt of the head. "The heels are a bit much for a Tuesday." Vivian gave a dismissive nod, already bored by my feigned clumsiness. I walked away, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, but my stride remained slow and deliberate. "I'm in," I whispered into the collar of my dress as I reached the balcony. "Good," Jae-hyun replied, and I could almost hear the dark smirk in his voice. "Now let's hear what the widow has to say." The audio feed crackled in my earpiece, a sharp contrast to the operatic swell of the gala. Through the static, Vivian's voice dropped its honeyed public mask. "The manifests are useless without the physical keys, Sang-woo," she hissed. My blood went cold. Sang-woo wasn't just a guest, he was the shadow behind her throne. Jae-hyun's ghost is still haunting the docks. If we don't finalize the transfer tonight, the Italians will pull out of the merger. "The ghost is dead, Vivian," Sang-woo's gravelly voice replied. "But the waitress isn't. My men found the kitchen staff who saw her lead him out. She's the loose thread." I stood by the balcony railing, my knuckles white against the stone. I had what we needed, the confirmation of the coup, but the air in the room suddenly felt heavy, pressurized. A security guard with a coiled earpiece stepped into my line of sight, his eyes scanning the auction table I had just left. He leaned down, his gloved fingers tracing the underside of the mahogany. Target identified, a voice barked through a frequency I wasn't supposed to hear. The guard looked up, his gaze locking onto my emerald dress. Amara, get out. Now, Jaehyun's voice commanded in my ear, no longer calm. I turned to the stairs, but two more men in charcoal suits stepped out from the shadows of the velvet curtains. I was boxed in. The invisible girl had become a beacon. The lead guard reached for his jacket, the silhouette of a weapon becoming clear, when the lights of the opera house suddenly flickered and died. A deafening explosion rocked the street outside. A series of parked cars, likely Jaehyun's handiwork, erupted into a choreographed chaos of fire and car alarms, drawing every eye and every guard toward the windows. Fire! There's a fire in the plaza, someone screamed. In the sudden panicked darkness, a hand clamped over my mouth and a powerful arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me backward into the service corridor. I prepared to strike, my elbow cocked for the throat, until I smelled the familiar scent of cedar and gunpowder. Don't move, Jaehyun whispered against my hair. He didn't lead me to the street. He led me up, toward the catwalks. From our vantage point in the rafters, we looked down at the chaos. Below, Vivian was shouting orders at Sangwoo, her face twisted in a snarl of pure, unadulterated rage. Seeing them together, the fiancé and the uncle, was the final piece of a jagged puzzle. He was like a father to me, Jaehyun murmured, his grip on my hand tightening until it hurt. The betrayal wasn't just a business move anymore, it was an echo of a life being systematically erased. We have the recording, I whispered, leaning into him as the red glow of the fires outside danced on the ceiling. We have the proof. It's not enough to prove it, Amara, he said, his obsidian eyes reflecting the flames below. We have to burn it all down. The fog rolling off Lake Michigan smelled of salt and betrayal, thick enough to swallow the towering cranes of the shipping yard. Pier 47 was a graveyard of rusted shipping containers and long shadows, illuminated only by the rhythmic, cold flash of a lighthouse. Vivian stood at the edge of the concrete pier, her ivory coat now stained by the mist. In her hand, she clutched a sleek titanium case drive, the digital ledger containing the keys to Jaehyun's entire shipping empire. A private speedboat bobbed in the dark water behind her, its engine a low, predatory growl. The Italians are waiting in international waters, Uncle Sangwoo muttered, glancing nervously at the darkness behind them. Let's move, Vivian. The city is crawling with sirens. Let them crawl, she snapped, her eyes scanning the fog. Once this transfer is signed, Jaehyun could rise from the dead and it wouldn't matter. He'll be a king without a throne. I watched them from the rafters of a nearby loading bay, my breath held tight. I wasn't in a gown anymore. I was back in the black and white uniform of a waitress, the ultimate camouflage. In this world, no one looks twice at the person holding a tray or clearing a mess. I was the ghost they had forgotten to fear. Amara, the wind is coming from the east, Jaehyun's voice whispered in my ear. He was positioned 500 yards away with a long-range rifle, a guardian in the dark. They're distracted by the perimeter. Go. I descended the rusted ladder, moving with the silent, predatory grace Jaehyun had drilled into me. I grabbed a discarded thermal bag from a catering van parked nearby, pulling a cap low over my eyes. I walked toward them not as a threat, but as a courier delivering a final gift from the dockworkers' union. Delivery for the pier master, I said, my voice flat, professional, and entirely invisible. The guard stepped aside, their eyes sliding right over me. I reached Vivian just as she turned to board the boat. I tripped on a slick patch of oil, the thermal bag flying forward. As Vivian instinctively reached out to steady herself, her hand left the ledger for a fraction of a second. My fingers, practiced and steady, made the swap. The real ledger slid into my sleeve, the weighted decoy I'd been carrying clicked into the titanium case. Watch where you're going, girl. Sangwoo barked, shoving me away. I'm so sorry, sir, I murmured, bowing my head, keeping my eyes on the ground. I backed away into the fog, my heart a frantic wild thing against my ribs. I didn't look back until I reached the shadow of a steel container. I pulled the real drive from my sleeve, the metal cold against my palm. I have it, I whispered. Across the pier, Vivian climbed into the boat, triumphantly raising the decoy drive toward Sangwoo. She thought she was holding a kingdom. She was holding a tombstone. The snow fell over Chicago like a silent curtain, blanketing the city in a deceptive, pristine white. Inside the restaurant, now stripped of its gilded lotus moniker and renamed simply the Archive, the warmth was a physical embrace. The scent of wood smoke and vintage wine filled the air, but the atmosphere had changed. The hum was no longer one of careless wealth, but of calculated precision. I didn't enter through the kitchen tonight. I walked through the front doors, my heels clicking a steady rhythmic cadence against the polished mahogany floors. I wasn't wearing an apron. My suit was a sharp midnight blue, the silk lining sliding against my skin like a secret. The staff, former colleagues who had once looked past me, now straightened their backs as I passed. They didn't see a girl who counted tips for dialysis, they saw the woman who knew the weight of every secret in the room. I approached table 1. Jaehyun was already there, his back to the glass wall that overlooked the frozen city. He looked up as I arrived, the predatory sharpness of his features softening by a fraction of a degree. On the table before him sat 2 glasses of deep red wine and a sleek digital tablet, the modern evolution of my old notepad. The waterfront reports came in, I said, sliding into the seat opposite him. My voice was no longer a jagged thread, it was a blade tempered and sure. Vivian's uncle has been moved to the offshore facility. The merger is dead, and the Italians have accepted the new terms. Jaehyun reached across the table, his hand covering mine. The dark ink on his neck caught the golden light of the chandelier, a permanent reminder of the world we shared. And the information from the auction? Processed, I replied, a small cold smile playing on my lips. We own the leverage on 3 city council members and the head of the Port Authority. They won't see us coming until we're already behind them. He squeezed my hand, his obsidian eyes reflecting a pride that went deeper than business. My mother, he asked softly. Settled into the private wing of the estate, I assured him. She has the best doctors in the country, and she thinks I've finally landed a corporate executive job. Jaehyun chuckled, a low, dark sound. In a way you have. You're the architect of the shadows now, Amara. I looked around the room, the golden light, the refined decor, the quiet staff. 3 months ago, I was a ghost watching a dead man walk. Tonight, I was the one who decided who lived and who fell. I had traded my invisibility for a throne made of whispers, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving the shift. I was ruling the night. Jaehyun raised his glass, the red wine shimmering like the blood we'd shed to get here. To the woman who heard it all. I picked up my glass, my gaze steady as I looked out at the city I now helped command. To the only man who listened.